Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you today for another one of my Ask Dr. Adriana Facebook Lives. This has been a really fun chance for me to kind of just talk to you guys about stuff that I have learned about, stuff that I have experienced myself or that I work with my clients on, a lot of themes that show up definitely in the work that I do in my private practice, coaching and working with people doing individual therapy. As many of you know, I'm also the clinical director of a drug and alcohol rehab program here in the Bay Area called Avery Lane, where we work with women who have co-occurring substance use disorders and mental health disorders, as well as trauma. And that work there, and I think everything that's been happening in the last couple of years, especially, has really inspired me to come up with my newest creation, which is Firebird Healing. And Firebird Healing is a trauma treatment program that right now is just virtual, but eventually we'll also be offering in-person work. We have some exciting things happening. We just finished our inaugural workshop, which was a 3-part series with TJ Woodward and I on healing from addiction and trauma. And we've got some other really cool stuff coming. We've got a workshop on self-care for the caregiver that's coming in September. We have a really exciting retreat to Bali. TJ and I are going to do a conscious recovery retreat to Bali next September, and a whole lot of other fun stuff that's getting created through Firebird. So if you guys are interested in finding out more about that, firebird-healing.com. And if you sign up for the mailing list, you can be included in all upcoming events, as well as we have some freebies for you if you choose to sign up for the mailing list. So check that out. But what I wanted to talk about today is the addiction to self-judgment. This is a term that I actually borrowed from Marilyn Bradford, who is an access consciousness facilitator located in New Mexico. And she wrote a really amazing book called Right Recovery for You. And what Marilyn talks about in that book is how the primary addiction that people tend to have is not to drugs and alcohol or sex or gambling or whatever it is. The primary addiction is to self-judgment. And that when you address that primary addiction, those secondary behaviors or addictions tend to fall away or be much easier to get over. So that's an issue I wanted to explore more. Where it kind of converges with my personal and professional experience is that what I've observed in the 25 plus years that I've been doing this work now is that people fundamentally, it just seems to be like the lowest common denominator across humanity, is that people seem to struggle with self-judgment. They have a strong inner critic. They have a lot of core false beliefs, which is something TJ and I also talk about a lot in conscious recovery. Core false beliefs meaning the way that you're seeing yourself through a very negative lens, believing things about yourself to be true that are not true. So that's things like, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to be happy. Everyone always leaves me because I'm not enough, whatever it may be, some variation on basically I'm not enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not creative enough, whatever it may be. And I see this with people kind of across the board. On some level, it seems like most all of us, maybe there's a few exceptions, seem to suffer from these negative self-judgments, that we seeing ourselves in a really negative light. And this is a topic that I really go into depth with in a new book I've got coming out called What If You're Not as Fucked Up as You Think You Are? In the book, I talk about how our core false beliefs develop, where we get them from, and how they impact us, and then what we can do to change them. In fact, the subtitle of the book is How We Come to Believe Lies About Ourselves and What We Can Do to Change Them. So if I give you a little overview of that, I mean, it really all starts in childhood. You know, we come into the world as the little babies, bright, shiny, happy, little joyful beings of love and light. And then as we start to look around us and see like how things function in the world, and we're looking to our caregivers and the people around us to show us how to be. This is generally when we start learning things about ourselves. Don Miguel Ruiz, the guy who wrote The Four Agreements and Mastery of Love and other books, he talks about this process as the domestication of the human, right? So we start to get programmed. We're told that this is how you're supposed to act. This is how you're supposed to look. And if you think about what happens when you go to school, it's like all rules and regulations: walk single file, raise your hand before you speak, ask permission to go to the bathroom. You can say this, you can say that, you can't do this. You can only do this on the playground. You can't do this in the classroom. All kinds of stuff that we learn. And on top of it, science is now telling us that up until about the age of 7, we're basically in a trance state. Our brain waves, when they measure kids' brain waves, they find that they're primarily of the theta variety. So you've got gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. And theta is the state of deep relaxation, meditation, hypnosis. Delta is sleep. Alpha, which is above theta, is kind of your relaxed, watching TV, chilling. Beta is probably what I'm in right now, thinking, talking, your brain is active and working, all that. So when children are in a state of theta, they're highly suggestible. They're basically hypnotizable, which is why, as I talk about in the book, why it's easy for kids to believe that some fat guy is going to come down the chimney and bring them presents every year on Christmas, or that there's an Easter bunny who's going to come bring them candy and chocolate on one particular day. Children will basically believe whatever's told to them. So if you look back on your own history, if you look back at your childhood, what were some of the messages that you received about yourself and about the world, right? I grew up with parents who managed to escape a communist country. They were children in World War II. They didn't trust people. They had a pretty basic point of view that the world's not a safe place, that you can't trust anyone, that people might be out to get you. And so that imprinted on me, right? And I came to believe a lot of those things. And it didn't help when I moved to New York and spent, a good chunk of my childhood in New York in the 1980s, which is a really crazy time when crack was a huge epidemic, and it was kind of nuts and it really wasn't very safe. And I remember going to college in New Hampshire, and everyone was so nice, and people you didn't know would say hi to you. And I was like, why are you saying hi to me? What do you want? I had this expectation that there was some sort of agenda attached to them even talking to me, because I had developed this belief, this core belief as a young child, that the world is not a safe place and people are out to get you. So that's one example. If you grow up with any kind of abuse, and then the abuse can be overt. It could be that you're actually told things like you're stupid, you'll never amount to anything, you're too fat, you're ugly, or this or that. That could come from parents. It could come from mean kids. It could come from bullies. It might come from a teacher. I can't tell you how many people, had an experience of an art teacher or music teacher who told them you can't draw or you can't sing. And those kids just shut that down, and never again would they try to do those things, even if those activities would have brought them happiness and joy. That seed was planted that I'm bad at this. I'm not a good artist. I'm not a good singer. I can't do this, because someone told them that. So we often get our messages that way. We also get these messages indirectly. Maybe we're being neglected. Maybe our needs aren't being met. Maybe we're not paid attention to. And so then you might come to believe I'm not important enough. I don't matter. And you don't understand as a child that may not have anything to do with you. Like maybe if mom or dad or whoever's not paying attention to you, it's because they have their own issues going on. Maybe they're depressed, maybe they have an addiction, whatever they've got going on, or they're just not really well equipped to be a parent, or maybe that's how they were treated by their parents. But a child who tends to be very egocentric is going to take all of that very personally and think, if I'm not being paid attention to, it must be because I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm not enough. And there you go again. That's the birth of these, core false beliefs. And so what happens is we have a bias, our minds have a bias it's called the confirmation bias. And we're always looking for the evidence to prove that whatever we believe about ourselves or the world is true. So if I believe something, for example, like, I'm unlovable and everyone always leaves me, who am I going to attract? Right? I'm going to attract people who tend to be unavailable, who tend to basically fulfill my self-fulfilling prophecy that I'm going to be left or abandoned or rejected because I'm not lovable, right? And so then as you attract those experiences and you keep having them over and over again, as my friend TJ likes to say, those beliefs get concretized. They become so solidified and they become your fundamental way of seeing yourself, because look, now you have the proof that those things are true because it keeps happening over and over again. And this is where you really start to see the addiction to the self-judgment kicking in, right? This is when the inner critic is developing. This is when you start to, you have that kind of running dialogue in your head sometimes around like, oh, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I, did badly on that test. Or, yeah, of course that guy would want to talk to me because I'm not pretty enough, or whatever it is. And this inner critic sometimes becomes like the internalized voice of the person who criticized you. If you had a critical parent or caregiver, you might hear kind of their voice that kind of becomes your voice. Or you just learn to develop it yourself. You develop this like really nasty part of you that's always saying ugly things about you. And we keep it. It's like an energy. It's almost like being on a loop like this, right? You just get stuck over and over again. And you'll tend to get thought distortions that come with this. I talk about this a lot in the book as well, like black or white thinking, all or nothing thinking. It's this polarized way of I'm good, I'm bad, I'm right, I'm wrong, I'm a winner, I'm a loser, I'm a success, I'm a failure. And you start seeing things in these more polarized ways. You might develop a pattern of catastrophic thinking where you're always imagining the worst case scenario. Or might do maximizing and minimizing, where you maximize the negatives and minimize the positives. The example I usually give with that is, you get a feedback survey about, like a speech you gave or a workshop you gave, and 98, percent is wonderful and 2% is not so great. And you'll fixate on that 2% and say, see, the whole thing was a failure. And you'll overgeneralize and come to all kinds of conclusions based on 2 pieces of negative feedback when 98 of it was really positive and supportive. And so this is how, and then it just kind of feeds itself, right? And then it eats you up inside and you develop toxic shame. And no wonder a lot of people then seek comfort, seek relief in something that will numb the pain of that. Because when you're thinking that way about yourself, it feels really shitty. You feel sad, you feel bad, you're angry at yourself, you feel a lot of shame. And then that often will lead you to behaviors that are not so great. You might get in those toxic relationships. You might get codependent and feel like you can't live without someone. You might develop an addiction to drugs or alcohol or food or something that will give you relief from that sense of I'm such a bad person, or I feel so bad about myself. So this is kind of the general overview. And we have a question. What are the first steps that we can take to change these messages that were imprinted on us when we were a child? Right. So that's the second part of the book. and what I cover a lot in my work with clients, both at the rehab and private practice. The good news is we have tools. We can change the way we think about ourselves. But first and foremost, we have to become aware that we're doing it, because most of us are doing this self-judgment and criticism on autopilot. We're not even like consciously aware that we're doing it. It's just like the programs that are running automatically all the time. So this is where I'm a big fan of meditation, and specifically mindfulness. I don't even know that it matters so much that you have to sit quietly, for 10, 20 minutes. But what that does do is it primes you to start paying attention, because you want to be paying attention to the thoughts that you're having. You want to become more conscious of the thoughts that you're having. You want to become aware of what these core false beliefs are for you. And you might need to ask some questions to get that information. Sitting in silence lets you, not be so distracted, so you can pay attention to your thinking. And then you can notice, how does your thinking affect how you feel? the emotional piece. And then how do you feel then leads to some kinds of behaviors. This is traditional cognitive behavioral therapy. It's kind of considered the gold standard of traditional psychology. And so looking at your thought processes, looking at your subconscious beliefs, the ones that you don't even know are there, we do that with a process of inquiry. So that might come in the form of a thought record. In the book, what I do is I offer home play at the end of each chapter where I cover a different technique or approach and then give you exercises in how you can do this for yourself. A thought record is going to help you uncover some of the automatic thoughts, some of those subconscious programs, the core beliefs, all of that. I also reference Byron Katie's work, thework.com. She's somebody who does a lot of work in this area of sort of distilling cognitive behavioral therapy into a easy to use 4 questions that you can ask. But questions are a really big part of this, right? A question always empowers you and gives you information and gives you a sense of choice and possibility, whereas answers tend to disempower you, contract the energy, and you come to conclusion. That comes from this work I do called Access Consciousness. You know, what else is possible? What other way is there to see myself? Where is this belief coming from? Is it even true? So a big piece of the work has to be, once you become aware that, oh, I'm having these kinds of thoughts, then are they true? Who does it belong to? Is it even my thought? Because another way that we learn these core false beliefs is from the people around us. We learn from watching mom or dad. If you always see your mom looking in the mirror saying, oh, I'm so fat, I don't like this, I don't like that, you might end up mimicking that. But you might do what one of my mentors, Dr. Dane here, calls plagiarize their reality. Or you then start taking on those same qualities, you know, and you'll see this. You see this in little girls already, you know, at a young age, they'll start to say, ooh, I'm too fat, or I'm too this or that. Where are they getting that message from? TV, social media, that's a big one these days, magazines, and the people around them and the kids at school and their older siblings and all of that, right? So they'll imprint some of this stuff there. So you also want to ask, who does this belong to and where did this belief come from? And is it actually true? What evidence do I have that this belief is true? What evidence do I have that this belief is not true? Is there a different way that would be more balanced or more accurate in seeing myself or the situation? Another question I really like from Access, what's right about me that I'm not getting? Or what's right about the situation that I'm not getting? That kind of forces you to come off that negative position and look at things differently. So I really like the power of the question as a way to start changing this. And then we can have other ways to shift the energies. You know, I'm a little bit more holistically oriented. And while I use CBT in my work, I also like to use energy-based therapies because that allows us to shift the energy around that belief. So I might use something from energy psychology. I might use EFT or tapping to help release the energy of the belief or the trauma around, you know, where it came from. Because oftentimes, you know, if you've experienced a traumatic event, let's say you've been abused or molested or something, and you come to believe it's my fault, that might be the seed of a belief. It's all my fault. I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to be treated well. And so we might need to do trauma work around the origin or root of that experience. Energy psychology offers us a lot of really powerful tools to do that. And it's a big part of what I offer through Firebird, as far as like, you know, individual therapies, and eventually we'll be doing group therapies as well. Tapping, EFT, Be Set Free Fast also comes from the energy psychology tradition. TAT, Tapas acupressure technique. You know, I talked with on my podcast, Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, I've interviewed a lot of the originators of some of these techniques, and sometimes they've guided us in an exercise. So if you want to find out more, you know, you might want to check out the podcast as well, because there's a lot of episodes on these energy psychology techniques. Access Consciousness also has wonderful tools to work with the energy of limiting points of view. We have a clearing statement. We have hands-on energy work we can do. The bars is like this body process where you're lightly touching these 32 different points on the head. That's releasing the excess charge that gets created by all of our thoughts and feelings and judgments and all that stuff. That's another great tool. There's so many different techniques. NET, neuro-emotional technique, is another one I love to use. That's really good because it uses muscle testing, because a lot of times we're not consciously aware of what beliefs are driving a certain feeling or behavior, or even the emotions we have locked in our bodies. NET is really good at uncovering what's below our conscious awareness, because we're using the body and a very specific set of questions to get that information. I mean, the list is endless. What I want people to know in doing this video, what I want people to know is that you can become conscious of the beliefs that are limiting you. You can become aware of the ways in which you are judging yourself and the addiction you may have to judging yourself or judging others. But if you're addicted to judging others, most of the time it's related to judging yourself. It might be that you're projecting onto other people the judgments you have of you. So there's always a connection there, is what I typically find. And then knowing that there are tools, that knowing that you can learn tools that you can use on yourself. What I really like about the work that I do is that I don't want my clients to be dependent on me, like that they can only, make these changes in sessions. No, I like giving people tools you can use on your own, because I'm not there first thing in the morning when you wake up and you look in the mirror and you go, ugh, right? But I want you to have a tool that you can use in that moment to shift the energy around that belief. And if you do this enough, and especially if you do that deeper work, the deeper trauma work maybe, or whatever it is around the roots and origins of this, you can eliminate these beliefs. You can eliminate this addiction to self-judgment. You can change those energies, and you don't have to keep beating yourself up into oblivion. So many people that I've worked with and have seen and witnessed in myself too are so much kinder and more compassionate to themselves. And we can bring in those spiritual principles. TJ and I teach a lot about that in conscious recovery. We talk about spiritual principles like non-judgment, non-resistance, the power of forgiveness, the power of compassion, the power of gratitude. When you go into gratitude and you start acknowledging what you're grateful for about yourself and what you're grateful for in the world and with others, it starts to shift you out of that negative thinking loop where you're so critical and negative. And then we have, along the spectrum, as far as like weird and woo-woo, you can go further out. And there's work that we can do in the spirit realm. There's shamanic work, because, some people view some of this more negative, critical stuff as being darker energies or entities that might be involved in that. There's 1,000,001 different ways to approach this, because this issue has existed since the dawn of humanity and has come up in every culture across the world and throughout history. And healers have had different ways to address healing of this throughout many different holistic therapies. And so there are a lot of different possibilities and approaches. And I love exploring all of that on the podcast and in these talks. And, me being a lifelong student, I'm always going to workshops and trainings and, ever expanding my own awareness of how this stuff works and how we can heal it. And now with all of the brain science too, science is really helping us have a greater understanding of like what is like the different parts of our brain and what's getting activated, and kind of when our emotional brain is taking over, and like what happens biochemically. And we can even look at all of that through that lens. We can look at this addiction to self-judgment is related to a trauma response, which has to do with a fight, flight, freeze response, which is a whole biochemical thing that we've got going on. So we can look at this issue through many different lenses, East and West, cross-culturally. We have many different techniques that can work to change this. And I just want people to know that it's possible. May not be easy work. I still consider myself a work in progress, even though I've come a long, long way. But if you have the willingness and the desire to change it, you can. So that's kind of what I had to say. I'm wondering if we have any more questions. All right. Well, if you guys want to find out more, you can find me on my website, adrianapopescu.org. We now have a website for Firebird Healing, firebird-healing.com. And of course, you can always PM me if you want to find out more about my work or set up a consultation or whatever it may be. But thanks so much for watching this video today. If you found this information useful, I would love it if you would share it, like, share, comment, all those social media things that, get the algorithms to share this information with more people so we can let others know that they are not doomed to suffer with self-judgment, that this is something that they very well can change. So thank you, everyone.